When the boat comes in.
Hello and welcome to the first When the Boat Comes In podcast with me, Chris Watts. I have to say I'm a big fan of the show. I was very lucky to interview Susan Jameson a couple of years ago. Fantastic to speak to the actress who played Jessie Seaton. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at each episode of When the Boat Comes In. I'm going to be talking about it, and then I'm going to be sharing clips from the show. If you want to get involved in this, please type on the YouTube page below and you can get involved if you like. So in this episode it starts off at the Picture House. It's a Charlie Chaplin film, isn't it? And this is when Jack Ford meets Jessie Seaton for the first time. And it's quite funny because Jessie Seaton thinks that Jack is laughing at the brave Tommies that were going off to war, but he actually finds it ironic that everybody believes that all these brave Tommies just went over the top and they were very happy about it. And as you can see in this clip, it was kind of a false narrative that the Picture Houses were putting out there.
There must be something wrong with your eyesight. Charlie Chaplin's not on till later.
There's no wrong with my eyesight.
You thought that was funny?
Now, Jessie.
Well, I wouldn't say exactly funny, no. You look like an educated woman, Jessie. Maybe you can tell me the word I'm looking for.
Watch your mouth, mister. That's my sister you're talking to.
Oh, hi. Got a bit of a temper, hasn't she?
No, look here.
Take no notice. He's been drinking.
Beats up on Adam, Jessie, every time.
It's such a great series, When the Boat Comes In. I was introduced to it by my parents. I loved it. I got hooked. And then I've been introducing it to as many people as I know, because it has kind of gone under the radar, I would say, and it hasn't been repeated on the BBC or been shown on many channels. It was on the drama channel for a little while, wasn't it? But then they took it off after the second series, I believe. So I've got the DVDs, I can watch them whenever, but it's good to let people know about this series because it's fantastic, very addictive. And in this first episode, this is where Jessie and Jack first get together. Big romance, obviously, and then it doesn't last, does it? Unfortunately, we'll get onto that in other podcasts. But in this first episode, you get to know the Seaton family because, of course, Jessie invites Jack back to the house, the Seaton house, and of course, her dad isn't very happy about this. He says that it always starts with a talk, doesn't it? It always starts with a chat, and then it can go on to other things. And then, of course, they're dancing, aren't they, later on? And, you can tell there's a sort of romance blossoming, kind of. But, Jessie and Jack's relationship, very interesting, isn't it? Very, very different, I'd say. I mean, different because of the era, of course, because Jessie's got so many responsibilities. She's a school teacher. And, in fact, in episodes to come, you find out that Jessie is actually paying for the rent and everything else because her dad has gone on strike, hasn't he? He's a miner, and she's the breadwinner. So Jessie has got a lot on her plate, and of course later on in the relationship she can't become pregnant because if she becomes pregnant it's going to jeopardize the family, and we'll get onto that in other episodes. But another main theme of this first episode is definitely shell shock. Because somebody that went to war with Jack, and also you find out later his best mate as well, he went to war with him. They see him at the pub, don't they? And he's acting very strange, and that's quite a funny scene though, because they offer him a beer, and of course he takes it, he drinks it, and later on they find out that the doctor said don't mix alcohol with his medication. And of course, this keeps going on, and he's suffering with shell shock, what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, isn't it? And there's the scene where he falls down in the street, and Jessie says to Jack, "Come on, we got to help him." But Jack doesn't really want to get involved. And later on, she finds out that Jack went to war with him. But as Jack says, there's nothing he can do for him because he's still fighting the Germans in his head. And this keeps going on. He keeps doing things like this. He'd be in bed, wouldn't he? Be having nightmares about the trenches. As you can imagine, you hear these stories all the time, don't you? From the past and even today when you think of conflicts. And yeah, it keeps going on. And then eventually, unfortunately, he kills or he beats up a Byrne, doesn't he? I think does he kill him or does he beat him up? I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, he hits him, doesn't he, with an implement because he thinks he's a Nazi. He thinks he's a German from the First World War. So yeah, eventually this leads to a court case. Jack defends him, which Jesse's mum can't believe, obviously, because hurting Burns. I will use the lingo on this podcast, but I'm not going to try and talk Geordie because I'm not a Geordie, but I love the show, but I will use the slang. And anyway, yeah. So she can't believe he's going to stand up for this man who's hurt a Byrne. But at the same time, you can see it from Jack's point of view why he's doing it. And Jesse kind of agrees with Jack and he stands up for him. And this is against Pinner, who is going to be the local MP. He's on the jury, isn't he? And he never got a medal. He never got a medal, and he thinks he should have had a medal. That's the thing. And the man with the shell shock won a medal, so he was jealous of this, and he got sentenced. There was nothing Jack could do about it. So yeah, it shows you the differences between now and then. I would hope so, anyway, because now they would take everything into account, you would think. Shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder, all that. Back then, no. He just couldn't help himself, I think one of the judges said. So, yeah, that's kind of a sad part in the story, isn't it? But the best bit for me has to be the ending. I really love that, is when Jack gets all of his men, all the troops, to line up. They've got medals, and they just throw them all down at Pinner's feet because, it was just totally out of order what he did to that soldier. I mean, obviously it was terrible what he did, but there was, it wasn't just a callous act. It was post-traumatic stress disorder or shell shock, what they called it back then.
Beg pardon, sir. Oh? We heard you were in the army.
Yes, Sergeant, I was.
Only you didn't get a medal. Not like us lucky buggers. Well, you can have mine. And Will Scrimge's.
Well, Constable, what are you going to do about it?
There's no law against being given a medal, sir.
We sure to met Jack?
Aye, maybe. But he's still our Member of Parliament.
Of course, Mary gets married to Tom in this episode, and it's a very good way to introduce the characters, I think, a wedding. And I think there's a very funny line where Jack's at the pub with Matt Headley, and Matt asks him, "Is it your wedding?" And then Jack Ford says, "Not yet, Bonnie lad, not yet." And I would say Matt Headley is one of the favourite characters on the show, isn't he? He's probably my second favourite character. He's a very funny character. And I think later on, it's actually in the last series, this guy who's a kind of a gangster, he says to Jack that you weren't loved, you were feared, but Matt Headley was loved. So it does show you how they were very different, but as a team later on when they worked for the Fitters Union, they complemented each other very well. And I think the wedding, as I say, is a great way to introduce the other characters, and it's great for the era kind of thing. I mean, because you see, of course, people dancing along to piano music, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, stuff like that. And yeah, it's kind of a shame that doesn't happen so much anymore, couples dancing, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good start to the episode to have a wedding. It's very sad, of course, what happens to Mary later on in the series. I mean, tuberculosis, wasn't it? TB, of course, back then. And just terrible if you think you can just die like that from nothing. But as I was saying earlier on, very hard times back then. That's why I think it's a fantastic series. Would I have liked to have lived back then? No, because there was a lot of inequalities, weren't there? And there was a lot of... It was just very tough, wasn't it? And I also think that's one of the appealing things about the show. You watch it and you think, well, actually, my life isn't that bad, really. I mean, what am I moaning about? Because these people had it so tough. So it's a very good first episode, I'd say. It really sets it up. Sergeant Jack Ford, you see him for the first time. He's wearing his uniform, isn't he? And yeah, a Charlie Chaplin film at the beginning, at the Picture House. You're introduced to a lot of the characters. You're introduced to Jesse's brother and also his wife, Mary, and the mum, of course. I mean, there's so many great characters in When the Boat Comes In, but I think it's the whole Seaton family that makes it for me. I mean, we'll get onto this later when we talk about the later series. I didn't mind them, but I didn't like them as much. I think it was the last one I wasn't so keen on because it was very, very different, wasn't it? It was about Jack making his way in the world, and Jessie and her other brother, Billy, were in it, weren't they? But that was near... You know, they weren't in many episodes. I think they were in the last episode together, weren't they? All three of them, which was good, but yeah, had a disappointing ending. But oh well, maybe it was quite realistic. I don't know. But anyway, it's great I'm able to do this now. I've managed to find some time because I've been very busy over Christmas, and I was going to do it last year, but I've been busy doing stuff. So yeah, I'm going to be going over every episode of When the Boat Comes In. And as I say, if you want to get involved in this, all you have to do is... type below on the YouTube link and say if you want me to talk about anything in particular.
When the boat comes in.
The second episode of When the Boat Comes In really centres around this kid who Bella and Bill take in. I mean, it's kind of reluctant from Bill, isn't it? He doesn't really want to help out, to be honest. He's probably thinking, well, I've just raised three kids of my own, so, you know, I can sort of see it from that side, but of course Bella wants to help him out, and she probably wants a kid back in her life, to be honest. And she does discover the dead body of his mum. That's sad, isn't it? I can't remember what she died of exactly. I don't know if that's ever revealed. But with this kid, it just never really works out. He's not very talkative, is he? He's probably suffering from shock, isn't he, that his mum's died. But of course Bill doesn't get on with him. And then the final straw is when he steals. Yeah, this is when the guy comes around selling his wares, the grocer, the greengrocer. Yeah, and Bella buys him some grapes. And then he has the audacity to steal from the greengrocer. So, yeah, it never really worked out, did it? I mean, she took him to the fair to begin with. Great old Victorian fair. But as Bill said, was it the right thing to do? That's interesting, isn't it? In times of grief, what do? Do you go to a fair, or do you feel sad about yourself? I mean, it's an interesting discussion, really. I think she was trying to take his mind off of everything that had happened, but she kind of overindulged him. She spoilt him too much. And then, in the end, it ends very sadly, doesn't it? And I believe he goes off to Australia, as many kids did back then. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids... did get abused by the church back then in Australia, which is true. That's come out. So, yeah, it's kind of sad thinking what happened to that kid. Hopefully he was okay. Hopefully he had a wonderful life. But, yeah, it's a very different episode, isn't it? I'm not saying it's one of my favourites, if I'm honest. It's not a bad one, but there's not much of Jack in it. You got some of Jack, but not enough for me. I find those episodes not as entertaining, if I'm honest. When you got Jack in it, it's always a lot more fun, as far as I'm concerned. Even the Cole Comfort one, I do like that episode. That's a really good one, where they're searching for Cole. We'll talk about that in future podcasts when it comes up. But yeah, because Jack's not in it, it's sort of not as good for me. He's in it right at the end, isn't he? When he goes, look what I've got. But yeah, I don't enjoy it as much when Jack isn't in it, even though I love all the other characters. I mean, with Jessie and her family, they're a mining family, aren't they? And there's a lot of politics in When the Boat Comes In, but I love it, to be honest. I mean, it's sort of politics that isn't spoken about anymore. Socialism, capitalism. It is spoken about, but I mean, of the era when it was, these were really polarizing opposites, weren't they? Socialism and communism, not communism, socialism and capitalism. Communism is in the final series of When the Boat Comes In, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, just very interesting when you see these really hard-hitting events, and then you see Jack like, having such a great time at these tea parties, or with the Duke of Bedlington, or whatever. But I love it all, to be honest. And I was thinking about this earlier. Who am I most like from When the Boat Comes In? I'd probably say Matt Headley. I'm not drunk all the time, but sometimes. But no, who would I most like to be like? Probably Jack Ford, but I'm more like Matt Headley, if I'm honest. I would say this is one of my least favourite episodes, just for the reason that Jack isn't in it, and it's very different, isn't it? It doesn't really address the mining issues or anything to do with Jack. It's all about this kid. I mean, it's not a terrible episode, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of my favourites. I think Bella is brilliant in it, though, the actress who plays Bella. I think she's one of the best characters, if I'm honest. But in this episode, this is the only episode where you're sort of like, what are you doing? She sort of really overindulges the child. I understand, because he just lost his mum. She's probably trying to take his mind off of it. But it just doesn't work out, does it? She takes him to the fair, first of all. Is that the right thing to do, after somebody's died? Bill didn't think so. But then again, like I said, I think she was trying to put it out of his mind. And yeah, it just keeps going wrong, doesn't it, with this kid? He doesn't talk a lot, probably suffering from shock, to be fair. But of course, Bill doesn't get on with him. They needed to bond, didn't they? If they would have bonded, then he could have stayed, probably, if he would have been a bit better at that. And then, of course, the final straw, the nail in the coffin, is when he steals from the greengrocer. Yeah, and Bella buys him some grapes. Obviously, must have been a lot of money back then. It does make you very grateful for things, doesn't it, when the boat comes in? I think it does. I mean, grapes. These days, grapes are very cheap, aren't they? But obviously back then, they must have cost a fortune. So, yeah, she buys him these grapes, and then he still has the audacity to steal from the greengrocer, which is totally unforgivable, isn't it?
Onions, tatties, ripe tomatoes.
Mum?
They're lovely.
Jess, can I ask you something?
I'm in a bit of a dash, Mum.
Can you lend us half a note?
Oh, Mum.
It's just that run a bit short and it's rent day.
You've not touched the rent money.
Had to, Jessie?
What'll Dad say?
It's just 10 bob, Jessie.
You've had me bought, Ma'am. 10 bob's all I've got. I've got my own expenses.
I'm sorry I asked you.
Well, it's not fair.
It's just 10 bob.
If you've gone into the rent money, you should tell Dad. When he puts his packet down, it's all there. He's never played keepy back with you.
Is that a nice way to talk to your mother?
Well, it's the truth. And maybe it's time you heard it.
So then sadly, I say sadly because this did happen in real life. A lot of kids were taken from England and taken to Australia. Sadly, as we know now, quite a few of them were abused by the church. Yeah, so that's not great, is it? That's terrible. So hopefully that never happened to this kid involved, this fictional kid. Of course it didn't, because it's all fiction. But you know what I mean? It's, yeah, it does make you think. And I love things like that, where it shows you the era. You know about it, you know. You hear about it from history, and then it's in this show. So they were very clever when they wrote this show, because they looked up historical events, and they managed to make it flow. And I love how it's edited when the boat comes in. It's very, what they call now is like, in radio anyway, they're like dead air, like you've got to be quick and snappy. There can't be any dead air. There can't be any, has to be edited right. It has to be on point, and then you're on to the next bit, and it goes, and it's relevant. It's that kind of thing. And it's done so many times with humour. You know, I mean, Bella is fantastic. I remember the scene where she comes in late, and this is when they're arguing about Tom being a blackleg, about him being, you know, a scab. And she comes in, and then Tom's left, and she's like, she puts the milk down or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, didn't our Tom come then?" And, you know, she sort of steals the scene, and she doesn't say very much. She has a great ability of doing that. Of course, Jack and Jessie, they're still in the early days of their relationship, and you can see how it's blossoming, how it's progressing. Of course, we all know what happens later, but we're not there yet, no. And yeah, it's very nice in the early stages, isn't it? And I think Jack would, if he could admit he made a mistake, he would, wouldn't he? He would have said that he made a huge mistake. What he does later on in the series, yeah. I mean, he does say that you could wait, I couldn't, which is basically it really, isn't it? But yeah, I think he'd always look back and think, what a fool I was, because they had something special. They were very different people, weren't they? Jack was all about getting on in life, making the most of things, getting the best for people, looking after his own. Jessie was all about looking after her own, but she wanted to help everybody else as well. So yeah, very different personalities, but they kind of, you know, like I was saying with Jack and Matt Headley, they complemented each other well because they were different personalities. The same with Jessie and Jack. They really complemented each other. So it was a great shame, wasn't it, that that didn't work out. Of course, it all added to the series that it didn't work out, as we'll talk about in future podcasts. But yeah, I mean, I think if he could say one mistake he made, that probably would have been it. And I wonder how it would have been different, the series, if Jack and Jessie would have stayed together. How would it have been different? I don't know. It's very hard to say, isn't it? You could imagine him at the Fitters Union, and Jessie would love that. She'd never like him moving past that, probably. But she was going to go to London with him, so it's all very interesting, isn't it? But it's also very theoretical, as you'll find out in future podcasts if you don't know already, but I'm sure you do know if you're watching this.
Politics is about shaking off the past.
So you tell me. But do I get a kiss?
Can't you be serious?
I am being serious.
You're never serious. I know, if you saw a beggar in the street, you'd probably drop your last shilling in his hat.
Maybe.
That'd be your day's good work.
And do I get a kiss for that?
My father believes it's more important to find a cure than just to offer a bit of relief.
So if I get dedicated like your dad, do I get a kiss?
If I ever meet a man 50% as good as my father, I'll marry him.
Why? Well, how about a half-hearted kiss for the other 50%?
I think what I'll do as well is, after I've talked about each episode from every series of When the Boat Comes In, I'll do an order of my favourites and my least favourites. And I would say this one, this is probably, this is quite near the bottom, actually. I'm sorry to say that if you love this episode. But yeah, I'm not as thrilled about this one. It's okay, it's not bad. But I mean, could I skip it? Yeah, I could. And I don't think you'd lose much of the story. Not much happens. You see this boy, and it's all about this boy, isn't it? And he's in their life for 5 minutes, and then it's all over. So from that point of view, I don't think it's one of the best episodes. I'm not saying it's terrible, though. I mean, there's a lot worse episodes in the final series. I think the worst episode for me has to be the last series, where Jack is in Liverpool, I believe it is, and he does manual work, and there's this guy that's sort of bullying him. And yeah, I just didn't like that episode. It was always going to be a real lull, wasn't it? That you find out Jack had all this money, he was in America selling booze in Prohibition, and then you're in the 4th series and he's lost it all. I mean, we'll talk about that in future podcasts when we get there, but that was very disappointing, wasn't it? My dream would have been that they would have been in America and you would have seen it, but obviously back then it was a lot harder to do something like that. Nowadays, if you think of shows like, I don't know, Peaky Blinders or something like that, you see things in America and they go there. I think it's a lot easier now, but back then it would have been near impossible to do America. But that would have been very interesting, I think, Jack Ford, Prohibition, America. But again, that would have been very different, wouldn't it? And that's what a lot of people complain about in the final series, is that it's so different from the first 3. I also want you to get involved in this podcast. I mean, I love talking about When the Boat Comes In. I could talk about it until it comes out of my ears. I think it's a fantastic show. But I also want to know from you, so type on the feed, who are some of your favourite characters from When the Boat Comes In? I was talking to somebody online about this, and their favourite was Tom Seaton. Of course, sadly, the actor who played Tom Seaton died very tragically when he was young, only 37, and he died of cancer. I mean, that's such a loss, isn't it? Because he was a fantastic actor in When the Boat Comes In. I mean, I think he played the role of Tom Seaton like nobody else could, if I'm honest. And there were so many different emotions and characteristics to Tom Seaton that made him such a great character that I think Tom Seaton has to be one of the best characters. But obviously, I love the lead character, Jack Ford. I love Jessie Seaton. I think she's a great character as well. His mum is absolutely fantastic, Bella. She always makes me laugh. The dad, of course, he's very funny as well. Yeah, Bill, the pitman. And Billy, I mean, Billy comes in for a lot of stick, doesn't he? He doesn't get a lot of love because of what happens at the end of the series. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll talk about that another time. That's not great, is it? But I don't know. To me, he was very good in what he did, because obviously he set up a free clinic, and back then you had to pay for healthcare. So that was amazing what he did. But at the same time, I never really warmed to him. That's just me, you know, maybe that's just me, but I never really warmed to the character. In the early episodes, though, he is more likeable, I would say. You know, like when they find the coal, he's really happy, isn't he? And when he goes on the hike with Jack, when they're planning the sheep stealing, he's good in that episode as well. You know, like, he's more likeable. I'm not saying I don't like him, but I mean, I warmed to, say, Matt Headley a lot more than Billy, you know. But that's the way it is. I mean, I'm sure lots of you have different opinions on your favourite characters from When the Boat Comes In.
When the boat comes in.
Hello and welcome to the When the Boat Comes In podcast with me, Chris Watts. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast so far. On to episode 3, Fish in Woolly Jumpers. Yeah, this has to be one of my favourite episodes. I was saying in the previous podcast how the second episode is probably one of my least favourites, but episode 3, Fish in Woolly Jumpers, is probably one of my favourites. It's up in the top 3, I'd say. It's the sheep stealing episode. Of course, this is where Jack Ford and Matt Headley, they go sheep stealing along with the rest of B Company, their old platoon. Yeah, and it's such a great episode, isn't it? I mean, it's one of them moments in When the Boat Comes In that defines the series, really. If you talk about When the Boat Comes In to somebody, they'll probably talk about this episode, won't they? The sheep stealing. Yeah, of course, things were very desperate back then. There were no jobs, nobody had any money, so as Jack says, they're more like Robin Hood and his merry men. Yeah, they go sheep stealing. They sell off some of them for beer money, but they also give them out as well, don't they, to help people. As he says, there's somebody who has 5 kids, he's a widow, etc. So you can see why they did it. You know, and I think it's fantastic. The way they do it is like trench raids, isn't it? And it's planned in that sort of military style. And this is a fantastic episode for so many reasons. It's the first time that Jack betrays Jessie, really, doesn't he? Although Jessie sort of... they needed to take it in the next step in their relationship, if you know what I mean. But then again, it was the era, wasn't it? That was the era, and she didn't want to get pregnant for obvious reasons. They were struggling with money. She was supporting the family, so I get that. But of course, he goes round Matt Headley's house, and his sister's there. He meets her for the first time. She likes a cigarette, so he offers her one like a gentleman. And then later on, of course, they've been drinking all night long, haven't they? And they're singing old army songs. And yeah, Matt goes to bed, and then later on, his sister comes down, and this is where Jessie and Jack, it sort of is coming off the rails a bit. Although I think he always loved Jessie. It's just obviously he couldn't wait, and you know, that's the way it went. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, with Matt's sister, is she a loved character, or do people not like her because this happened with Jack? I mean, I remember later on, she says, "I always wanted you, I'm not going to lie," when she gets pregnant. Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's such a fantastic series, and this episode has to be one of the best, doesn't it? So, and of course you see Tom's outside looking at this all happening. He's figured it out, hasn't he? That Jack's having a fling with Matt's sister. And then he says to Jack that he wants to be involved in the sheep stealing, although he doesn't know what it is at this point because it's all very hush-hush. And Jack says, Tom's the right name for you, Peeping Tom. Yeah, so he was very clever there, wasn't he? I thought he was very clever to manage to get in on that job because he never fought before. That's the thing. All the others are like, well, he didn't go to France, so what does he know about trench raids? But he does come through in the end, although he leaves a bucket, doesn't he? He leaves a bucket behind, and then Jack has to bail him out, and that's a brilliant scene, isn't it? And of course the policeman gets it in the end.
Hey, you!
You've killed him. Don't be daft. It's a sheep were killed.
Earlier on in the episode, of course, Jack and Billy go for a hike in Morecambe. This is where all of the sheep are, and yeah, it's quite funny. They get on quite well, don't they? And well, the funniest bit there has to be when the policeman comes over and Billy's like watching birds. Yeah, ornithology, isn't he? But for you, watching birds will be fine. You know, it's quite funny how in that era, if you spoke in a posh voice, you were taken a lot more seriously, wouldn't you? And then the police officers, like the policeman, is like, "Oh, sorry, sir," you know. And it was very lucky they had the glasses, though, wasn't it? They had Captain Manners glasses, and yeah, Jack had them. But I love the bit where he's explaining about during the war, and he wants to know from Billy, like, what does this mean? Basically, Manners' son was fighting with him in the First World War. He gave him his binoculars. But he said to him, I want to dine at the Savile. And then he says all this amazing food that he's going to eat, the white bait and the steak. And then he asks Billy, he's like, so what is the Savile? And he says, it's a gentleman's club. So, yeah. So it's just such a great series, isn't it?
Can I have another cigarette?
Of course. I'll have one with you.
Oh, I didn't mean... I don't think I should smoke it down here.
I do. You're a very pretty woman.
I think you've had a drop too much.
I have. But I can still see you're pretty.
Hey, now, wait a minute.
And I can still think and all.
A funny way of thinking you've got.
You said 3 months and 2 leaves. And then you said I still miss him.
Well, I do.
That was over 4 years ago, you said. 4 years without a man.
I didn't say that.
You didn't have to.
Very rude.
Not rude, money lass. Honest. It's been a long time for me and all. Too bloody long.
So Dolly and Jack get together, and yeah, I mean, he just wanted to get his leg over, didn't he? Let's be honest about it. And then it continues. He sees her in the next episode, doesn't he, at Manners' place. She's working there as a parlour maid. And yeah, I mean, personality-wise, I don't think they were really made for each other, were they? I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes opposites attract. But yeah, Jack's very intelligent, whereas Dolly, I'm not saying she's thick, but compared to, obviously, Jessie Seaton, she's not mentally that good, is she, compared. But she seems nice enough, but I do wonder sometimes, like, some of the scenes. It's funny when she's like, I always wanted you, and when she gets pregnant, and there'll be more to talk about on that subject. But yeah, Jack and Dolly, I think it could have worked if they had the kid. I think if they had the kid, it could have worked. Yeah, I think it would have. But they didn't, of course, as we'll talk about in future podcasts. But with this episode, it is one of the best, without doubt, without question. I mean, there's so many great moments in it.
Good night, Mr. Ford.
Good night.
I'll see you in the morning.
It is the bloody morning.
When are you going up?
Well, we might as well have a nightcap first.
You've, of course, got the scene with Jack and Matt Headley at Matt's house, at his parents' house, where they're singing. And I do like these drunken singing scenes. They're quite funny, aren't they? I like the one where Matt is really drunk. I mean, that's funny, isn't it, in a later episode. This is to do with when he does something wrong at the Fitters Union and he just takes to drink, doesn't he? And his partner won't let him in the house because he's so drunk. But very funny, aren't they, those scenes? I do love those scenes. And some of those old songs, I mean, there must have been a lot of camaraderie, that's the word, in the army. Obviously, if he was in the army, you know, it's life or death. So I love those scenes. I think they're fantastic.
Down that long, long trail with you.
Seems like ages ago.
Another bloody world.
At least we haven't forgotten trench raids.
Just as well.
That lass of yours, has she any idea what you're up to?
No.
You gonna tell her?
Maybe. After we're married. If we ever are.
Another thing Billy says, which is quite humorous when they're out on the hike, is when Jack says what sandwiches they've got, and Billy says, oh, that's convenient because they've got mutton sandwiches, they've got lamb sandwiches, and of course all the lambs are there. But yeah, I mean, that whole scenario is great, and with that bit where he talks posh, Jack actually takes this on board in a future episode, doesn't he? Do you remember when he has to be king for a day? I think the name of the episode is he has to pretend to be somebody else. And yeah, he gets this from Billy, actually, which is very different because Billy, I don't think there's another example where Jack learns from somebody to better himself, because he adapts to the situation, doesn't he, in King for a Day? That's a great episode as well. Very different, though. This is all about Jack getting on, isn't it? It's about buying a house for Horatio Manners without them realising that it's for Horatio Manners. So he has to invent this story up about how he got his fortune, and then he gets it for a really cut price, doesn't he? So he does a deal with Manners, so he gets a certain percentage. And yeah, Jack's brilliant, and he's so crafty, clever man, very clever. And he'll always be looking at the situation. He'll be weighing things up, thinking, well, how can I make some money out of this? And real entrepreneurial spirit, really, from Jack Ford.
Why don't you come up with me tomorrow? We'll take a hike, stretch your legs.
Where to?
Morpeth?
Yeah, I'd like to, Jack.
Hey, Jack, I was nearly forgetting now what Tom was in. He left a message to say he's been looking all over for you.
All right, Mrs. Seaton. Did he say what it was about?
Ah, a fella he knew in the army, Bert Mather. He was killed, poor lad. Tom was wondering if you could help him find his widow's address.
I see.
Ah, I better get on with the tea.
As I always say when I do the podcast, please get involved. It's always lovely to hear from you when you type on the YouTube feed. And there's a lot of love for this show when the boat comes in. As I said before, it is kind of a mystery why it's not on the BBC or it hasn't been shown much, although apparently it's going to be back on the drama channel soon if you haven't got the box set. I think a lot of fans have got the box set though, because it just isn't shown enough on the TV, is it? I mean, it deserves a lot more respect, I think. I love the show. I think it's fantastic. The acting is top drawer. And what I love about the YouTube channel is I've shared clips from the show. People haven't seen it before, and they're like, what a brilliant show. Where can I watch this? I always say buy the DVDs. But yeah, it is going to be on the drama channel soon. But yeah, I do love that about the YouTube channel, that I can share these clips and talk about the episodes, and then it'll get more. I mean, a lot of people know about it already, but of course, younger people who haven't seen the show, I'm not that old, but you know what I mean. If they haven't been introduced to the show by family members, how are they going to know about it? Because you wouldn't look for it but if you've never seen it, if you don't know anything about it, I don't think you'd just buy the series. So that's why I'm really enjoying putting together these podcasts for everyone, and I'm loving uploading the episodes as well and the moments. So thanks a lot. It's been great, and there'll be more of these to come.
When the boat comes in.
Episode 4 of When the Boat Comes In. I tell you what, this is one of my favourite episodes from Series 1, Swords and Pick Handles. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Of course, the main theme of this episode is Tom Seaton and how he becomes a scab, how he has to work to support Mary, because of course she's dying of tuberculosis, isn't she? She's got TB. So I kind of see it from Jack's point of view, because of course the whole Seaton family are in uproar because they're a big mining family, and to scab is like a real cardinal sin. But to Jack Ford, he says, well, you'll have to scab because your wife's sick. And I get that. Personally, I get that. You know, what else could he have done? Of course, later on, he did thieve, didn't he? He became a thief. But before that, he decided to scab. I mean, Tom had so many different jobs, didn't he? Gardener, thief. Yeah, funny. But yeah, I kind of see it from Tom's point of view and Jack's point of view. Of course, I get it from the other side as well, because to scab in a mining family, wow, that's something you don't do, isn't it? But still, he did it for the best intentions, didn't he? Because his wife was dying of tuberculosis, and he thought, well, the only way I can save her, the only way I can support her and potentially get her through it, is to get the money that she needs.
But gratitude doesn't pay doctors' bills, only money does that. And I'm gonna get it.
I love this episode, everything about it, and of course I love the job interview that Jack Ford goes on with Horatio Manners. It's a brilliant scene, isn't it? I mean, I love the bit where Horatio, he pulls open the curtains just before Jack arrives. You know, he wants to see what kind of man he is. And I don't think Jack fully knew that he was going for a job. Not at first, anyway, but he cottoned onto it very quickly. And I just love the whole scene. To begin with, of course, Jack is kind of buttering up Manners. He's saying all about his son, because they fought with each other in the First World War. And, as I was saying in the previous episode, he basically said his last words to Jack Ford, didn't he? Saying he'd like to dine at the Savile and what he would like to have. And then Jack got Manners his son's binoculars, which we spoke about in the previous podcast. Yeah, I mean, I thought that scene was fantastic. It's about 10-12 minutes long, but it's brilliant, isn't it? And Dolly's there as well, because she's the parlour maid, so you've got a bit more of that going on. A real ladies' man, Jack Ford, yeah. He certainly loved the ladies, didn't he? And I think later on, Horatio Manners is like, they're your weakness, and he's like, they always will be. So, yeah, I mean, I think they have a really good sort of... To begin with, it's kind of friendly, Horatio and Jack, but then it really turns later on, doesn't it? It gets to the point where Horatio is actually scared of Jack Ford. And I think he says to Lady Caroline that it's taken me a long time to realise this, but I am. Which is surprising, really, because when you first see them together, I'm not saying they're friends, but they get on quite well, don't they? Because they both want to get on in the world. And of course, this interview is all about to see what Jack can get away with. He needs to find out what lies he can get away with and how tough he can be if he needs to be. And Jack, of course, passes with flying colours, and eventually he's offered a job in London, which is worth a hell of a lot of money back then.
You impressed him, and you puzzled him too.
Puzzled him, sir?
You were his equal in strength and courage.
Oh, I doubt that, sir.
He didn't. Had twice as many brains, used them too. What puzzled him was that he knew you would survive the war and he wouldn't. And he was right. Did you see him die?
Yes, sir. I was holding him.
Did he say anything?
Yes, sir. He said, what the hell am I doing here, Sergeant? I said I'd be at the Savile. And then he died.
Was there much pain? No, that's a damn fool question. You'd lie anyway.
I would, sir, but I don't have to. He went very quick, sir.
You have a kind heart as well as a good brain. Did you like the army?
No, sir.
Why not?
People kept on trying to kill me, sir.
I forgot. You never knew it in peacetime, did you? It's all I did know. I was a sergeant too, you know.
Yes, sir?
Didn't my son tell you?
We didn't have all that much time to chat, sir.
12 years. Then I took my discharge. My brother sergeants thought I was mad. I didn't. I went into business, used my savings and my wits. I am a rich man, Ford. I suppose you knew that.
It seemed likely, sir. You've got a title and your son was always flush.
Go on.
He had money, sir, a lot more than his pay.
You didn't.
Still don't.
I wonder if anybody's watching this who hasn't seen When the Boat Comes In. I hope not, because obviously I reveal a lot of what's going to happen. But as it was originally out in the 70s, I don't really feel the need to say spoilers, you know. But you never know. There might be somebody watching who's never seen it before. What I suggest is you watch the series first, because I will be talking about things out of context as well, you know, because I've seen it 100 times. I love it. It's one of my favourite TV shows. And yeah, of course, it's very sad with Tom Seaton, isn't it? What happens at the end of the episode, because they eventually find out he's a scab. And of course, Jessie is at the school. I mean, I think that's a brilliant scene as well, where the kids, they're all outside and they're shouting scab, aren't they? And even before that, in the classroom, where she tries to confiscate some football cards, I think it is. And he says, I don't have to do what you say because your brother's a scab. And that's when she knows that everybody else knows. And then all the kids, when she leaves school, shout scab at her.
Scab! 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 Scab!
So then she tells her dad about this bill, and she wants to tell the police, but Bill's like, no, don't do that, because I know what will happen if you bring the bobbies in. And he says, get Jack. And I really love that bit where Bill says,
Get Jack.
Jack and I aren't speaking.
Then go on, bloody make him speak.
I think that's brilliant. I really love that. And of course, Jack is the man, isn't he? He likes getting in a scrap, doesn't he, Jack? I mean, he enjoys it. He really enjoys it. It's his nature. And the fact that he can help her out as well. But originally, of course, she goes to the bar, goes to the pub, and he's not... They've fallen out, haven't they? Because basically, Jack has told Jessie that he wants to work for Sir Horatio Manners and be what she calls a boss scab. Yeah. So they've fallen out at this point, but eventually Jack does come through because he says to Jessie, I've never seen you beg before. And then he helps her out and he helps Tom out. And of course there's 4 of them, isn't there, that take on Tom. He's got the medicine. That's why it's so tragic, because he's got the medicine in his hand, hasn't he? And then they kick lumps out of him.
Scab. Scab. Get him. Well, Scab, what are you going to say for yourself? Listen, you got it wrong. I had to. Me wife's ill. Bloody liar! Let him go. Oh.
First one that moves, I'll break his arm. Who's in charge of you 4 heroes?
Me. Oh, you'll be sorry for interfering. One of these days.
Not while I've got this. Now, you 2 bugger off and take the Sleeping Beauty with you. You, away with me. Tom.
And then luckily Jack turns up with something in his hand, hits the ringleader, and then that's that really, isn't it? But he takes him back to where Mary is. Of course, she's very ill. She's not very well. She's dying, isn't she? Of course, at this point, you're hoping that she'll get through it. Sadly, that doesn't happen. But at this point, anyway, he takes one of the miners back who was disagreeing, who had a go at Tom. They beat lumps out of him, didn't they? And he can see how sick Mary is. So surely he must understand it. Although I didn't like him at the end because he was like, he basically said, well, she hasn't got much time to live, has she? That's basically what he said, wasn't it? And I thought that was really harsh. Even if it was true, do you say that on the deathbed? You know, like later on she does pass away. I can't remember which episode as yet. But yeah, I thought that was really out of order to say that, to be honest.
Will there be any trouble?
No, Mrs. Sitton. I thought there would be, but I was wrong.
Jessie's downstairs, Mary. I'll send her up.
Jack,
Right.
there really won't be any trouble.
You've got his word for it.
Where would I rate this in terms of the first series? As I said, it's one of my favourites. It's either my third or second favourite, I think, in the whole series of the first series of When the Boat Comes In. I just think it's got everything in there. You've got the whole thing about Tom being a scab. You've got Jack meeting Horatio Manners for the first time. I think it's a brilliant episode, one of the best. And as I say, I love all the business stuff in When the Boat Comes In as well, because Jack is very clever, but I of course love the working class things that the Seaton family get up to, of course, because they're a mining family, aren't they? And I think it's funny later on in the series where Bill says, we've produced a rare breed. We've produced a teacher, a thief, and a doctor. Yeah, that's very funny, isn't it? And as I said before, I think the first two series of When the Boat Comes In are the best. I like the third one. I like the third one as well, but the first two are my favourites. I'd even say maybe the second one is better. I really love everything to do with the Fitters Union and Jack. And, of course, Matt Headley at the Fitters Union. I love all those episodes. I think they're brilliant. I like the third one as well. I like the third series, but, of course, it gets more into what Jack's doing, doesn't it? The first two series is pretty much all centred around the Seaton family, isn't it, with Jack enterprising. The third series, it starts, near the end of it, it starts to move towards Jack a bit more, doesn't it? And finally, the fourth series is pretty much all about Jack. Yeah, but the first two are definitely my favourites. And when I spoke to Susan Jameson, she was like, yeah, I'm glad you're talking about the first two series, because that's what it was really like for those people back then. And that's why they were so brilliant, the first two series.
It was telling it like it was and what it meant to the people up there, and it was in their hearts and affected their bodies physically and everything, and it was just incredibly real, I thought.
You've got spirit, Jessie. You're frightening out and you stand by your family. And you're an honest girl. Honest through and through, even when honesty hurts. Jack admires that more than anything.
You think Jack's like that?
I know he's not, and so do you. But that's why he wants you, me bairn. So some of that honesty might rub off on him.
I doubt it, Mum.
Well, it wasn't hard to give it a try. See, there's two Jacks, Jessie. There's a big laughing lad that'd give you the shirt off his back. And there's clever Jack, crafty Jack. Hammer you flat if you got in his way.
You think I could stop him being like that?
Not the way you're going.
I think Sir Horatio Manners was a fantastic character. I mean, I'm not saying I agreed with everything he did, but you understood him, didn't you? You understood that he was all about making money, and for that part, he was brilliant, wasn't he? And I loved how him and Jack sort of... They had kind of a partnership, but then it turned, didn't it? And Jack basically didn't want to work for nothing, did he? I think in another episode he says, like, well, back in the early days, I'd work for you, I'd get nothing, and you'd have all the money. Where's the fun in that? Which is fair enough, isn't it? And as I say, later on, Horatio gets scared of Jack. Yeah, and of course, I love those episodes later on with Lady Caroline and all that stuff. I mean, that's what's great about it, because it shows you different spectrums of society, doesn't it, when the boat comes in? You've got the working class people, you've got the bosses. It's great that you can see it all come together. You've also got lots of different politics, haven't you, as I've mentioned before. So it's a really good mix, and it gives you a sense of what the era was like.
I think I'm going to offer you a job.
A job, sir?
Don't sound so surprised. It's what you came here for, isn't it?
Just thought I'd let you know as well, the When the Boat Comes In podcast is now available on iTunes, Spotify and Amazon Music. So if you don't want to look at me, you can just listen to it if you like. Or maybe, it's not convenient for you to watch YouTube. But yeah, if you want to just listen to the podcast, it is available on iTunes, Amazon Music and Spotify. And I'd also say, because if you're listening on those platforms and you don't know it's on YouTube, it is on YouTube, the When the Boat Comes In podcast. You can find us on YouTube, obviously. And yeah, we also share a lot of clips from the show.
When the boat comes in.
Hello and welcome to the When the Boat Comes In podcast with me, Chris Watts. On to the next episode then, Cold Comforts. This is probably one of my favourite episodes without Jack Ford. I don't normally like it when Jack isn't in it. I don't find it as much fun. I don't think a lot goes on, but a lot happens in this episode. Of course, the Seatons are unable to get coal as they normally would because they're on strike, the mining family. So they decide to dig at home to get coal. Yeah. And it is a very humorous episode, isn't it? Of course, the other thing about it is that Billy wants to quit university. He wants to become a politician instead of a doctor. Of course, his sister's really against this because she's paid all this money for him to go to uni. And they're trying to figure out how to get him back on side to become a doctor. And as Jesse's mum says, she says there's more than one way to skin a cat. And in the end, Bill basically says to him that as a labourer, you're bloody useless and nobody would listen to you. But as a doctor, people would listen to you. And there's also the scene where Tom is growing leeks and these young kids nick the leeks, don't they? And then they make something with the leeks for them to eat because they're so starving. And to begin with, he goes around there and he has a go at them, but then actually he's like, you can keep them, you can take the biggest ones, because he sees how bad they are. He sees how low on nutrition they are and everything else.
Your bands. Make a nice leek pudding, did you?
What do you think you're doing?
Oh, so it was leek broth, eh? And you know with what, missus? My best prize leeks. I'll beat the living daylights out of
No,
them.
you're
no.
not.
Out the way, missus. Somebody's got to teach him a lesson.
Tom, look at the bands, man. Look at them. When did they last eat, missus?
Yesterday,
When yesterday?
about dinner time.
What did they have?
End of a loaf bit of marge.
See, man, Tom, they're starving. No, forget it, man. Let's away home. Time to get back to the table, Henny.
Come on, you out of that. Get on with it, and you out. I'll get paid for some washing tomorrow. They'll eat meat tomorrow.
Some milk, missus. Get some milk down them. These bairns need calcium or they'll end up with rickets.
She's doing the best she can, the mum, and she was like, oh, I would have told them off, but... And then obviously they see how bad they are that they sort of let them off about it. But yeah, it's a very different episode, I'd say, Cold Comforts. I haven't got too much to say about it. That's why I've decided in this podcast I'm going to talk about the next two episodes in order, because I've got a lot more to say about Empire Day on the slag heap than Cold Comforts. But it is nice to see the Seaton family all together. Of course, you got Jesse, you got Tom, you got Billy, you got Bill, you got Bella. Great family, aren't they? Really nice family. But I think it's really clever the way the dad gets Billy back on side to go back to uni and to become a doctor. I thought that was very clever. And as Bella said, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
You found some, man.
How did you
Come and see, Jessie. Come and see.
Billy, give us a chance. How much, Tom? How much?
Why, it's hard to tell. I don't know how thick it is, but it sounds solid enough.
There'll be a bucket or two in there anyway.
Get away, we'll supply the street. Hallelujah! Hey, man, we found it, man. We found it.
Well, I gathered as much. How soon can I have some for the fire, then?
Why, it'll take half an hour for the first bucketful. Be quicker after that.
Hey, maybe I could get a shot fire in and blast it out. Come a bit quicker then.
Hey, Dad, can I take a bucket full to Elsie Carter?
You can take a bucket back to Edinburgh if you like, son.
Grand.
On to episode 6 of When the Boat Comes In. There's a lot to talk about in this episode. It's one of my favourite episodes from Series 1, Empire Day on the slag heap. So much happens in this episode. Of course, you've got Bill Seaton having his pit accident, And it's terrible the way the mining company try and just give him £100, fob him off with that. But luckily Jack Forge stops it, and then they're entitled to a lot more money. I thought that was disgraceful, personally.
Your usual signature, Mr. Seaton, just here.
You bloody ghoul.
I beg your pardon?
You heard me, I said ghoul, but vulture would be more like it.
Oh, the hell are
content
you?
with breaking his back, you want to eat up the rest of him as well. You've got the nerve to call this a receipt. No further claims against the company. Adequate and sufficient compensation. Freely admit it was caused by my own error of judgment. You very near signed your life away, Mr. Seaton. Give him his money back.
Jack, it's £100.
Give it back, Bella.
Mr. Seaton, you're acting very foolish.
Thank you for calling.
Mr. Seaton, I think
Good
you ought
day.
to...
You heard him, mister.
Never known you turn money down before, Jack Ford.
Stinking £100 for that.
Well, they're paying all the hospital bills. 'Twas them got them this private room.
So they bloody well should. Sorry, Mrs. Seaton, it was them put him in it. Now, you listen to me, Mr. Seaton. Don't you sign anything till you've talked to your area secretary.
Right, Jack.
And talk to him quick, and mind you, tell him whose fault it was.
You've got Mr. Ashdown making a proposal to Jesse Seaton. Yeah, very much a proposal. He asks for a hand in marriage, doesn't he? Which is very surprising, isn't it? He's quite a lot older than her.
Miss Seaton, I see from the school's records that you're 25 years old. I'm 43, but I've never had a day's illness in my life. I hold a second-class honours degree in history from the University of London, and my current salary is £370 per annum. This I can offer you, together with respect, admiration, and, if I may say so, devotion. Miss Seaton, will you marry me?
It's quite funny the way Bill thinks he's not a working man. Yeah, he calls him a Nancy, doesn't he, or something. But yeah, he's kind of an oddball in the Seaton family. He doesn't really get it, does he, to be honest? I mean, eventually he does make his way into the Seaton family, and when Bill gets his own corner shop and he's getting into money, he's very happy that Mr. Ashton is in his family because he can advise him on money and going to the bank, etc. But to begin with, they're not really in favour of this. Of course, Jesse goes out with Mr. Ashdown for a meal, a 3-course meal. They're hours, and Bill doesn't believe that they've just been doing that for so long. And Jack comes over, and she isn't there. They had to make up some feeble excuse, didn't they, that there was a meeting at the school. And Bella says, I don't think Jack would have fell for that, which is probably true. I can't imagine that he fell for that one. But then you got the bombshell in Empire Day on the Slag Heap. The bombshell is that Matt Headley's sister, Dolly, is pregnant, and Jack's going to have to break the news to Jesse Seaton. And this is one of the saddest scenes in the show, I think, when he tells her, when he says, I've got a girl into trouble. It's really sad, isn't it? I mean, but he's a man of his honour, isn't he? He's a man of his word, Jack Ford. As he says to Dolly later on, he says, I'm going to marry you, because that was the deal he made with her, didn't he? So he is a man of his honour in that respect. But I think he'll always... You're always thinking with the character, he's thinking what might have been if he would have ended up with Jesse Seaton.
Are you taking her to London?
No.
You mean you'll leave her here?
I mean, the job's off.
But why?
I'd never do any good away from here. Anyway, maybe you and Billy were right. Look what happened to your dad. There's work here crying out to be done, Jesse, and I can do it better than most. So long.
But the best part of the episode for me, or the worst part, I mean, there's a lot that happens in this episode, is when Bill has his pit accident, yeah, at the coal pit, yeah. It's very sad, isn't it? He loses the ability to walk. He ends up, as he says, being a cripple. That's the way he described it back then, of the era. and eventually he runs a corner shop pretty reluctantly. But it's quite funny with Bill, because to begin with, he doesn't want to run this corner shop. He says these people, they just count their money all the time, and it'd be awful. And he ends up doing that, which is quite funny. But he ends up being very successful, very more of a capitalist, really. If you're thinking of the era, socialists and capitalists, when he was a miner, obviously he was more of a socialist, but when he becomes a shopkeeper, he's a capitalist, because he's sort of enterprising, isn't he, and thinking about the money. So that's very interesting as that develops later. But at this stage, he has the accident. It's terrible, but it's even worse the way they were just going to fob him off with 100 quid. You know, I mean, obviously it was a lot of money back then, but it wasn't enough for a broken back, as Jack says. And it's brilliant the way he stops him. And then I love the scene where they go to the pub, and the union, I think it's the union secretary, isn't it? And Matt's having a drink with him. They're talking about the football, and then Jack stands up and he makes it clear that they're not doing their job. And the guy from the union's like, "Are you one of my members?" And he's like, Tom's like, he's a friend. He's doing this for nothing, out of the goodness of his heart.
I'm just saying to the lads here, what an awful thing to have happened.
Could have been a lot worse, Mr. Crawford.
Worse than a broken back?
It could have been a broken back and 100 quid compensation and not a penny more.
100 quid? Are you sure?
I was there when it was offered. In the private room paid for by the company. The fella from the company was there too, Mr. Crawford, handing out the money and asking poor old Bill to sign what he called a receipt. I read it, Mr. Crawford. If Bill had signed that, he would have admitted it was all his own fault and the company was giving him that 100 out of the goodness of their hearts. There in that room, I read it, Mr. Crawford. And where the hell were you?
No, look here, are you one of my members?
No, thank God.
Then what the hell's it got to do with you?
He's a friend, Mr. Crawford. A chap that's helping me daff and out, while the fella that's paid to help him sits in a pub and drinks beer.
Also, during the Empire Day at the school, they hear this horn, which means they're going back to work, the miners. Jessie thinks that they've won, but as it transpires, her dad tells her that no, they didn't win. They're taking back the same starvation wages, as they call it, that they had so many weeks or months ago. So that's a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it? And even Matt Headley says it takes a miner to do something as silly as this. I think he says something along those lines when Jack sees him later at the pub. And yeah, I mean, they didn't cave in, did they, the bosses? And yeah, as it turned out, all that, as Matt says, so many weeks of misery, all for nothing, all for naught, as he says.
Why on earth should that thing go off at this hour? Does anyone know?
The strike.
Well?
It must be over. We must have won.
How much you get? Nout. Gave us nout. Same wages we struck against 8 weeks ago. I'm bloody lucky to get that. Near the boss's talk. 8 weeks of misery and all for nout.
In the next episode of When the Boat Comes In, we'll be speaking about a first time for everything, and then we'll be moving on to Paddy Boyle's Discharge, which is one of my favourite episodes. I think it's fantastic. But yeah, I hope you've been enjoying the podcast. It's a lot of fun putting them together, so subscribe on YouTube, find me on iTunes, When the Boat Comes In podcast, also on Amazon Music, and on Spotify. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
When the boat comes in.
Hello and welcome to the When the Boat Comes In podcast. Today we're talking about episode 7, which is called There's a First Time for Everything. A very good episode. I did very much enjoy this one. Basically, the two first times for everything. Well, first of all, is Bella opening up a shop for the first time. And this is great because Bill has no idea this is going on because he's been away at the hospital, hasn't he, recovering from his pit accident. And he's very much against this, but Bella realises that she has to do this. Otherwise, they're just going to be living on handouts for the rest of their lives. And it's interesting with Bill because to begin with, he's so against this. And he was saying like how he'll be counting every penny. And then that's exactly what he does, doesn't he? And he really does embrace it. And he becomes a bit of an entrepreneur, doesn't he? When it comes to running corner shops, later on he buys 3 of them, I believe. So To begin with, he hates the idea, though, doesn't he? And Bella sets it all up. She gets a bell. She gets Jack to make her some shelves for the shop. She gets stock. She buys some garlic or something, doesn't she, from the Frenchman at the very beginning of the episode. I remember that bit. And the other first time for everything in this episode is Jack getting married to Dolly, which is very much like a shotgun wedding, isn't it? If she hadn't got pregnant, there's no way they would have got married in the first place, of course, because he wanted to be with Jessie Seaton. But sadly, that never happened from his point of view, because we know what happened with him and Dolly, unfortunately. We'll get to that in later podcasts. As I've said before, watch the series first before you start watching this, because I don't say spoilers at the beginning of each podcast, because as I said, it was made in the 70s, wasn't it?
Here's to Mr. and Mrs. Ford.
Yeah, so the other first time for everything was when Jack was doing a toast when he got married. First time for champagne for Dolly. Yeah, and that's a lovely scene there in the pub. But Jack looks so awkward when there's that moment with him and Dolly. Mr. and Mrs. Ford, Matt Headley says. And Jack, he just looks so not up for it, really. He's, it's not who he wanted to marry, but that's the way it went for him. And of course, another part of this episode, which is probably the main thing, the main theme of the episode, is Ronnie Fairbairn.
Where is it you've got to start? With Pitmas.
Ronnie Fairbairn, who's very talented, he can draw, and Jessie wants him to go to a drawing office. That's where he has to start to learn his trade, etc. But he's from a mining family, so he has to go down the pit so that his mother will still be supported and given money. They won't be given money if he doesn't go down the pit, basically. So she makes the hard decision, and she says she'll get him out of there as soon as she can. But unfortunately, it doesn't go right at all, does it? It goes completely wrong, and it's very sad. Tom takes him in to begin with, and yeah, he's involved in an accident where he dies. Yeah, it's very sad, isn't it? Because you see that scene where Jessie and Mr. Ashton go to visit the mum, and they're trying to convince her not to do this. But I don't think she wants to do this. It's just how it was back then. You wouldn't have been supported, and the guardians, as they were called back then, wouldn't have given her money if her son didn't go down the pit. So you can't really blame her in that situation. She didn't just have one kid either. So, but it was very sad, wasn't it, Ronnie Fairbairn? And he was so excited about going down the pit. I mean, it's a bit like when you have your first day at work, isn't it? It's that kind of thing, thinking, wow, I'm grown up, this would be great. But as Mr. Ashton says, not very nice work. No, it wasn't, if you're being honest about it. Tough times, tough people. I mean, I've got some family members who were pitmen from a long time ago in Wales, but, obviously, that was of the era, and it's just very sad about this kid, because he obviously had talent to do other things, and that's another thing that Mr. Ashton says, is that the main industry in that area is the pit, is coal mining. So, yeah, it's quite funny with Jessie. She sort of says about all these different talented people, kids, potentially out there, but they all end up down the pit, and then Mr. Ashton's like, you're overstating the case a bit. But, yeah, I mean, if you were from that area, the majority of lads would end up down the pit, wouldn't they? So I think that's probably the saddest bit of the episode, if I'm honest. I think it's very sad the way he dies. I mean, he gets run over, doesn't he, by I think Tom calls it the Chimins. And I think Tom's last line of the episode is very poignant. I'm finished with a lot of them, because first of all, he had the whole issue of being a scab, where he was just trying to help Mary, wasn't he? Because she was dying of tuberculosis. And then he had the other moment with his father, you know, nearly losing his life, becoming disabled. So I can understand it, really, that he wants to be finished with a lot of them. And then this kid, he just takes him there one day, on the first day as well. That must have been very hard.
Scab! Scab! Get him! Well, Scab, what are you going to say for yourself? Listen, you got it wrong. I had to, me wife's ill. Bloody liar! Da?
When the boat comes in.
One of my favourite episodes from Series 1 is Paddy Boyle's discharge, and the episode starts off with Sid Hepburn visiting the pub and bumping into Jack Ford and telling him how wonderful life is in the Black and Tans and how much money he's making fighting the IRA. He doesn't tell Jack the truth. The truth is that Sid Hepburn is scared and he wants Jack to sign up, and that's the deal he's done with his commander so that Jack will be bossing his job because he's only a squaddy. And then Sid Hepburn will get his discharge. But that doesn't happen. No, it doesn't. Jack doesn't fall for it, does he? I mean, he's so clever, Jack Ford. To begin with, he's tempted, I think, with the money, because he's on a lot of money, isn't he, for a squaddy? And if he was bossing his job, he would be on a hell of a lot more. He does visit Sid Hepburn's commander later on, and he says how he needs brains like those Irishmen.
I should imagine that was pretty rough.
They didn't serve no cucumber sandwiches, sir.
Used violence, did you?
No, sir.
Oh, come, Ford, we're alone.
Didn't have to, sir. Sooner or later, they always told me the truth. Use violence, and truth is the last thing you get.
You're no fool, Ford.
Thank you, sir.
I couldn't use a fool.
Who could you use, sir?
A man like you.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a very good episode. I did find it funny the way Dolly was very happy about Jack going off to fight the Black and Tans, along with potentially her brother. I mean, they might not come back. I know times were different back then. Money was scarce, but still, you know, if you think about it, both of them could have died, really. I always found that very strange. Of course, Paddy Boyle was the other member of Jack's squad in World War I, along with Sid Hepburn. And that's the thing he can't get his head around, because with Paddy Boyle, he said about a stick bomb was thrown in where they were, and then Paddy threw it back. Actually, I think it was Matt Headley who said this, and, you know, a second later they would have died. So it all seems very strange. Paddy Boyle has joined the IRA, but he's not really an active member, is he? He just gives information. He starts to follow the two Black and Tans, and then the horrible one, Bartram, beats him up, doesn't he? So then Jack beats him up. That's quite a funny scene. But yeah, I mean, it's funny when Jack visits the IRA, and then the member of the IRA is like, that's sort of an Irish answer. So they can see how clever he is as well. But Jack doesn't really want to get involved in it, to be honest. And he's heard the terrible atrocities, etc., from the other side. So he doesn't want to get involved, does he? I mean, it was a terrible conflict, as we know, and we do know atrocities did happen. Back then. But it's a great episode, isn't it? And, of course, another sad moment in this episode is when Mary dies. I mean, she's had a long battle with tuberculosis, and she sadly dies. And you see Tom at the end. And that's a great scene. Great acting. I mean, he's just gone thieving, hasn't he? And you can see he's really, obviously his wife's just died, and he's crying his heart out, and he's got all the money and everything he's stolen on the bed because he's brought it home to her. But yeah, that was sad for Mary that there was no upside. Even though he started to really get the stuff that she needed, it wasn't in time, was it? But yeah, tuberculosis, what a terrible way to go. And back then, a lot of people did die of things like that, like malnutrition and tuberculosis and Spanish flu. That's another one that comes up in the series later on.
I did my best, Mary. You know I did. I'm only sorry it wasn't good enough. But I'll look after our Tommy. I swear I will. He won't starve, Mary lass. And he won't have charity either. Oh, Mary. Mary.
Paddy Boyle, I think Jack was more sympathetic towards Paddy, although when Paddy comes round and he's helping Jack with the decorating, he didn't want to, did he? That was quite funny. He paints a line on his suit, doesn't he? Because he's basically saying, stop asking me about Sid Hepburn, you know, because to be honest, I think he wants to stay out of it. He doesn't want to choose a side. It's not his war. He's not really interested. But at the end, it's sad because they get to the train station. Unfortunately, Matt had too much to drink. He had a habit of this in the series. I loved Matt Headley, though, great character. But you know people like this, don't you, who drink too much and they say too much once they've had a drink. And Matt, yeah, he was one of those. And unfortunately, he said to the member of the IRA who Jack visited, along with Paddy Boyle, about the two black and tans and where they were going to be at the station. And of course they meet them at the station, and unfortunately Sid Hepburn dies, but more unfortunately Paddy Boyle dies, because, you know, he was kind of swept along with it, wasn't he, really, because I think the member of the IRA was like, you heard about what happened to your family members in Cork or something like that, and then, you know, so Jack felt very sorry for Paddy, I think, more than Sid. Yeah, because at the end he does say, looks like Sid Hepburn got his discharge after all, but Paddy didn't. Because Sid wanted his discharge because he was scared. He was scared, and if he made the deal with his commander that if Jack Ford was signed up to the Black and Tans, that he would be able to get his discharge. But as it turned out, no, he got his discharge in a different way, but a fantastic episode.
Behind you, Paddy man, behind you!
Mons and Wybers, Cambrai and the Somme. And the poor bugger had to buy the bloody railway station.
Well, at least Sid Hepburn got his discharge. Pity poor Paddy had to get his and all.
On to episode 9, An Angel on Horseback. This is one of those episodes that doesn't feature Jack Ford, so a very different episode, and it's mostly about Bella's uncle. And basically Bill doesn't like him, mostly because he's Irish, to be honest, but Bella absolutely loves him. And the funniest part of the episode probably is, well, it's not funny that Bella's uncle dies, but the funny part is he likes a flutter, he's Irish, and he makes a bet on his deathbed, basically, and all three of the horses come in, but sadly, because of something that happened at the racetrack, the bets don't come off. You know, she gets her money back, but she would have won like £9, which was a lot of money back then. And she pays a lot of money for his funeral, and Bill isn't happy about this. I think it's 15 bob or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the guy, the undertaker, who was arranging the funeral, he was out of order, really, wasn't he? He sort of tricked her into paying more money. And yeah, he had a nasty way about him, I thought. He wasn't very sympathetic about anything. Maybe that's the way it was back then. They were just interested in the money, I suppose. In terms of a business, yeah, you're always going to have business, aren't you, sadly? But yeah, I mean, this episode is very different. And another part of this episode is Tom falling for the girl next door, Rosie Trotter. They used to go for walks, Billy, him and her, years ago. And then he sees her one day at the Seaton family household, and yeah, he likes her, he takes her out. But because the two mums have been talking about Mary passing away not that long ago. It's actually only one episode before, so it might be a bit too soon. That's the reason it's called off, because of the mums. Yeah. Yeah. Tom's like, oh, it doesn't matter, who cares? But it obviously mattered to Rosie. They convinced her that it was too soon after Mary's death. It probably was, to be fair, one episode, but there you go. Yeah.
Bella!
His master's voice. How sweet upon the evening breeze.
Bill goes out with Billy, and basically Bill wants to find out, will he be able to walk again? And he never really gets over the fact that he can't walk again, can he? I guess you never would. He never gives up hope that maybe one day he'll be able to walk again. I mean, it is something you take for granted, isn't it, being able to walk? I mean, as soon as it happens, you must think about it every second of the day, I would imagine. And with Billy, I think he knows that it's just too much of a risk, really. But he does later on, I think, in another episode, or was it at the end of this episode, he finds a specialist who is prepared to work on Bill's back. But the problem is, because the odds were so great, he could possibly end up in a worse state or die. So Bella convinces Billy that it isn't worth it, and of course it isn't. You know, he can get by, even though to Bill, you know, it is the end of the world. This is a good episode. It's a different episode, isn't it? As I say, because Jack Ford doesn't feature in this at all. It's all about the Seaton family. And, yeah, I find it funny with the Irish uncle. Because obviously Bella loves him, but Bill doesn't want to have anything to do with him, really. Even when he dies, he's like, I never liked him, blah, blah, blah. When he should have just said, sorry, you know. Yeah, it's quite funny. But yeah, they're a great couple, aren't they, Bill and Bella? They're very humorous, and they bounce off of each other very well. On to episode 10, King for a Day. It's an absolutely fantastic episode, a very different kind of episode, because Jack is in the world of the rich, isn't he? Very much so, because Sir Horatio Manners asks Jack to get the price down on this mansion, on this piece of land. And he does this very successfully, because to begin with they want 70,000 and he gets it down to 35,000.
Got a job for you.
Well, we've been through all that.
Short-term contract? A week, say? Paying £20.
You what, 20 quid for a week's work?
Another 20 if you get what I want.
What do you want, Sir Horatio? The crown jewels?
There's a house I'm interested in. Land, too. About 3,000 acres. Belongs to a chap called Lord Calderbeck. His nephew runs the place. They don't know I want it. If they did, they'd push up the price. I want you to find out how low they'll go.
But he's very clever, Jack Ford, in this, because he finds out the exact price from Billy. He bumps into him, and he talks to one of the bailiffs that used to work for Lord Calderbeck, who got the sack. And, yeah, he finds out the exact price, and he does a better deal for himself. Originally, Manners was going to give him less than the 150, what he got. And it's really good from Jack, the wheeling and the dealing.
50,000's as far as I'll go.
Hold on a minute. They'll come down.
How much?
First off, Calderbeck wants to go and live in the south of France. Give him enough to buy an annuity and he's happy. But for one thing, Freddie, his heir. He doesn't like Freddie, but he feels he's got to provide for him.
Go on.
Well, now he's provided for. He's going to marry Mrs. Cromer.
This is no time for jokes, Ford.
I'm not joking.
Well, I'll be damned. How much?
Hold on a minute. 20 quid, you said, and another 20 if I brought it off.
That's right.
It's not enough.
Then?
1% of everything under 50,000.
You must have got a good price.
I have. I talked to the bailiff and a few others. I know exactly what this place is worth.
How much?
35,000.
And you're asking £150?
I've just saved you 15,000.
Could get it without you.
Oh, no, you couldn't. Freddie's handling the deal. I've just had a talk with him. For some reason or another, he thinks he's grateful to me, poor bastard. 35,000 is his price to me.
I like the bits with Bella at the Seaton shop, of course. Dolly goes to the shop because when Sir Horatio first goes to see Jack, he basically wants to get Dolly out the way because, you know, he is kind of frightened that Dolly says it, that she might show him up. I think he is, to be honest. So he suggests to get some coffee for him and Sir Horatio, so they can talk business, basically. And Mrs. Seaton takes pity on her because obviously Bill sees her, and after what's happened, he doesn't want anything to do with her. And coffee, I suppose coffee was very la-di-da back then. It's not now, is it? But back then, I suppose everybody used to drink tea and they wouldn't drink coffee. It's funny when he's like, freshly ground, yeah. But yeah, Bella takes pity on Dolly, and because she turns a bad way, doesn't she? Because she's pregnant and she has to sit down, etc. She gets the coffee, but she goes back and she realises, because Jack and Sir Horatio are no longer talking, Sir Horatio has left, that yeah, it was all to get rid of her. But this does come back later on in the episode, which is quite interesting, really. This is the part where, sadly, Dolly has the miscarriage, and I think that was the end of Jack and Dolly. Once that happened, it was never going to be the same. And to top it all off, it was, of course, Jessie's coffee. Bella gave her the coffee at the Seaton family shop, just gave it her. It was Jessie's coffee, and she says it will choke us if we drink this, and she blames the coffee for the miscarriage. You know, a bit extreme, but when the doctor says she's heavily sedated, Jack's like, she knows what she's saying.
Miscarriages are seldom fatal, Mr. Ford.
So I believe, but they can have other effects.
Indeed they do. I'm very sorry. I'm afraid your wife will never have children.
Poor Dolly. She's in a private ward.
Sir Horatio Manners telephoned from Calderbeck House about it. It's all been taken care of, Mr. Ford.
Hello, bonny lass. What's all this, then?
Coffee from Mrs. Seaton. Take it back. I should never have taken it. Please, Jack.
She's heavily sedated. I shouldn't let it bother you.
Yeah, maybe she is. But she knew what she was talking about.
It is, of course, New Year's Eve. A lot happens in this episode. Jack Ford is looking after Sandy Lewis from Glasgow. He does a fantastic speech at the union's meeting, and I think Jack learned a lot from Sandy. He really did. I mean, later on it comes out that Jack obviously knows what to say, but he doesn't necessarily believe it, whereas Matt Headley would say what he believed, you know, and everybody would believe it. Jack could say anything and they would believe it. That was the difference, wasn't it? But it's a great episode, and of course they all meet in the pub early on, don't they? They're all there because Billy's working behind the bar. Jack goes into the pub with Sandy, and Tom's there as well. And it's quite funny with Bill, the way Bella's trying to get him to go round Jessie's. It's New Year's Eve. First footings, as they called it back then, where everybody has to do a party trick. I love that, to be honest. I mean, they should bring it back. No, I really like that. I mean, everybody's singing around the piano. Of course, it wouldn't happen these days, but you know what I mean. Really nice. And even Arthur gets involved in this. That's quite a funny scene, isn't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, I was going to make a toast, but I made a New Year resolution not to make toasts.
Very wise.
How about you, Tom? You making any resolutions?
What for, like? Oh, I see what you mean. Let's think. In the new year, I'll resolve to keep my fingernails clean.
You mean it, I hope.
Definitely. I'll put all the muck in my leak trench.
Hey, my dad was just telling us he's made a New Year resolution and all.
Oh, aye?
He reckons he's going to smile at all his customers, but he's got a bit out of the habit, so he's going to give us a practice run tonight.
Hey, watch it, Billy.
Oh, wait, just a little, innit?
Now, don't rush it, Dar.
He's cracking.
No, he's not.
Oh, yes, he is. He's cracking.
Hey, careful now, Dar. It might hurt the first time.
Easy, does it?
Just a little bit more, Dad. Oh, I felt that!
And again.
Now just look at that.
Oh, wait, I'll give in your beat.
End of round one. Congratulations, Dad. You're up on points.
Oh, well done, lads. That was a miracle.
The end of the episode, I mean, this is like, oh, Bill says Happy New Year, doesn't he? Because basically a rival shop, a sweet shop, has said that they were open past a certain time, but luckily the guy from Glasgow is there, because then he throws a brick through their window, because, you know, they got a summons from this because they were open like half an hour later or whatever. So I thought it was a very good end to the episode.
Where's Hunter Street? Top of the bank.
Regular sweet shop, why he wouldn't bother.
Have you been making cinder toffee?
Oh, bother.
Happy New Year.
Some say.
When the boat comes in.
Heads you win, tails you lose. This is a fantastic episode of When the Boat Comes In. Tom at the beginning of the episode wins at pitch and toss. Big time. Like winning the lottery back then, I would imagine. But unfortunately, two unsavoury characters don't like this. They don't like it at all. So later on in the episode, one of the most memorable scenes from this episode has to be the tin panning. I mean, I thought that was fantastic, showing what local villains could be expected of back then. And this was basically women back then would all get their tin pans out. They would hit them with anything they had to make them feel embarrassed, really, of what they had done. And I thought that was a really good part of the episode.
There's no to be frightened of. It's only women and bairns. Out! Out! I think the women will look after them now.
Matt Headley falls for the widower of an outside man in this episode. It's kind of really sad, because of course back then, if you lost your husband, the father of your kids, you weren't really entitled to a lot, and Matt wants to be with her, and I expect he thought, well, I can offer you a wage as well. I mean, that's what it was like back then, wasn't it? Very much so. But unfortunately, as she says, she's not over her husband, and she's still married even though she's a widower. That's the way she feels, and that's fair enough, obviously. But it's very sad for Matt. I remember when he gets really close to her burn, doesn't he, her kid, and he's playing with those tanks. Do you remember? And he's saying about he feels like them. And it is very sad. I mean, it's great the way Matt eventually does find love, because in this episode it feels like he's never going to meet anyone, really. But what a nice man Matt Headley was, and eventually he does. But in this episode, no, it just doesn't work, does it?
Aye. Come on and clap your hands. And for what? To see a woman like that have to get down on knees to scrub. A woman proud as a queen. Aye, and bonnier than many a queen. Sometimes I feel just like that tank. Blind, clumsy, hacking thing.
Probably one of the funniest scenes of When the Boat Comes In is when Dolly locks out Jack and Matt Headley. Yeah, because basically Jack has been seen with Jessie Seaton, and that's basically what it's all about, to be honest. She does mention about her not being taken out, and she'd like to be taken out for a change, which is fair enough, but it's funny, the woman that she's locked in with, she's like, I'd never do that. You know, they're working men, they need feeding. Yeah, but it's very funny. They go back to the pub, of course, don't they? And Jack's like, we've been locked out, and Billy's laughing his head off.
But they're men coming in from work, Dolly. Don't you feel a twinge?
Not me, missus. I've started just as I intend to finish. They've been bad enough to me, the pair of them.
Lot! Dolly! Dolly!
I'd never dare.
Save your breath.
I never shouted. I never said a word.
The best thing about this episode for me is the ending. I mean, the tin panning, yes, but the way Matt Headley and Jack Ford help out Tom Seaton, I loved that bit. I mean, the whole bit where the villains, they're saying to Tom, take your boots off, there's a good lad, and like really baiting him. And then Jack Ford does exactly the same to them and they don't like it. I thought that was brilliant. And yeah, Tom was really thinking of leaving at this point, wasn't he? Because he had this money, and obviously the local villains were after him. So again, Jack, he's the man, isn't he? He helps the Seaton family out, he really does.
Stop! Right! Now let's have your jackets. What for? Because I say so. Come on. Now your belts. Away, get on with it. Now your boots. Come on, let's have them.
On to the last episode of When the Boat Comes In from Series 1, a kind-hearted rat with a life belt. Yeah, very aptly named. And my favourite part of the episode, or one of my favourite parts, is when Jessie Seaton sees Jack Ford in the courtroom, and she's like, "You wonderful, cunning bastard." Yeah, because that's basically Jack Ford in a few words, isn't it, to be honest? I mean, it's all about this lady who can't pay her rent. Jack stands up for her. It seems like a very noble thing to do. It is. But of course, he's thinking of the end game. He wants to be the boss at the Fitters Union. Of course, Dolly doesn't understand this because Jack does go to prison. But when he comes out of prison, everybody's there, aren't they? They all celebrate him, and he's there with his hammer, isn't he? Which is fantastic. It's a fantastic episode. I'd say it was one of the best episodes, if I'm honest. I mean, it has everything in it. And Jack, yeah, that's what he is. He's a wonderful, cunning bastard.
That woman had nowt. If it had been left to you, she'd be in the workhouse now and her bairns would be in the orphanage. Well, that's not my idea of justice, never was and never will be. I did what I could, and I'd think myself less of a man if I hadn't. Well said.
If this uproar continues, I shall clear the court.
All right, lads, all right. Give me his chance, give me his chance.
I shall hear anything more you have to say. Anything relevant, that is. No more political speeches.
I reckon you've had enough for one day. With folks like you, it takes a long time to sink in. I've finished. Till the next time.
You will go to prison for 1 month.
Oh, you bastard. You wonderful, cunning bastard.
And it's so brilliant what he does at the meeting, at the branch meeting for the Fitters Union. He completely outstages the chairman. He says something that the chairman was going to be saying in the next meeting. He says that it's urgent. We can't wait, basically, because of the poor plight of this woman. And another thing that gets me is when Jack is helping out some other people. Dolly is like, does it give you a good feeling? And Jack's like, more than that. So he's always got an end game, Jack Ford. Something I really admire about him. He did make a difference, yes, but he was very clever. He was very cunning, and it's just the differences of the characters, isn't it? Like with Matt Headley, he was very much heart on his sleeve. He meant what he said. With Jack, maybe he didn't, but he got results, didn't he? Another episode I'm thinking of is when he paid for people to put their hands up one of his speeches that he makes. Yeah, very clever Jack Ford.
Left a widow and 2 bairns, and they're all not far short of starvation. It's either crawling on her knees to the guardians or the workhouse for her and the orphanage for her bairns. Now, brothers, I know we're facing short time, but surely to God we can manage something.
Hello, Jack.
No, thanks, Herbie, I'm just off. The wife's not been too well, and I don't like to leave her on her own too much.
Well, we've got a good man there. A chap with a bit of heart. Time somebody thought of the wives and bairns.
Of course, Tom Seaton is finally grassed up, it must be said, by the same lady who Jack Ford helps out. Yes, it's hilarious, isn't it? I mean, well, not for Tom, but yeah, he ends up going to prison, and it's quite funny when he's in the court. He doesn't have anything to say, and that was shocking, in fact. The judge is like that, isn't he? You will be sentenced to 3 months.
Thou shalt not steal, that's a commandment. And I've seen it broken.
Aye, me and all.
Not that far away, neither. The wicked shall flourish, the book says. That one flourished all right. Good suits, money to burn, until the police got it.
Shot him, did you?
Better to do your punishment in this world, Mr. Ford, than in the hereafter. But you don't have to worry. You'll be among the elect.
I've got them!
How many?
6. And there's 2 barrows coming.
Where are they?
In the back lane.
Right. Now you go down with Matt. 2 up here, 2 on the stairs. You and the other 2 load the barrows, right?
Where do we take the stuff?
Has Les come?
No, he says we're committing an illegal act.
Oh, he does he? Well, take it to the branch office.
And mind you don't get caught, Jack.
I'll manage. Go on. On you go. Well, Brother Poskett.
I'm not one to bear a grudge, Brother Ford. I believe in direct action. I'm glad to see you doing all.
The barrows come?
Aye.
Right, let's get on with it. Right, in you go, lads.
Come on, Jack. Somebody split. The landlord's on the way with the police.
You need a rear guard, then.
Come on, Jack.
Don't talk daft. Matt, you'll never get away with 2 barrows if I don't stop.
You could do time for this, man.
Aye, Matt, I could. A martyr in the workers' cause. You better give that to Mrs. Downey. She'll never leave without it.
So I'm just looking through the episodes of When the Boat Comes In on the DVD here, thinking some of my favourite episodes from Series 1. There's so many, isn't there? I would say the last episode, definitely. I would also say I really enjoy Empire Day on the Slag Heap and Paddy Boyle's Discharge. There's so many. King for a Day. There's just so many, isn't there? Have you got the DVD box set? If you haven't got it, I definitely recommend it, yeah. On to Series 2 next. I hope you've been enjoying the When the Boat Comes In podcast. I did this out of a love for the show. I also talked to Susan Jameson, who played the part of Jessie Seaton, so you can see that on my page as well. Next time, of course, it will be all about Series 2, talking about each episode of When the Boat Comes In order. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
Well, Matt. Jack. All the better for seeing you.
Away. I've ordered breakfast.
Oh, canny breakfast that.
Looks like you've enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it? That was medicinal. How's Dolly?
I've kept an eye on her.
Good lad.
Looks like there's going to be a procession.
I always said you were the best corporal I ever had.
Where's the hammer? On the floor by your feet.
Dance to the daddy, sing to the mommy. Dance to the daddy, to the mommy, sing. Thou shalt have the fishy on a little dishy. Thou shalt have the fishy when the boat comes in. Thou shalt have the fishy on a little dishy. Thou shalt have a haddock when the boat comes in. Thou shalt have the fishy on a little dishy. Thou shalt have the bloater when the boat comes in. Thou shalt have the fishy on a little dishy. Thou shalt have the mackerel when the boat comes in. Thou shalt have the fishy on a little dishy. Thou shalt have the salmon when the boat comes in.